Welcome on back to another Tim Cain reaction. This one, YouTube, is on unneeded realistic designs. I'm assuming this is about games that do realistic designs that kind of don't work or are, I don't know, realism doesn't equal fun. But sometimes more realism is more fun. Depends on the game. Depends on your market too.
Hi everyone, it's me, Tim.
Hey Tim,
Today I want to talk about unneeded realistic designs.
go for it.
What I mean by this is I was talking to a friend who's actually in the game industry. Never worked with them, so industry distant colleague. And he asked me a very simple question. He said, "How come you've never really had weather in a lot of your games?" And I started saying things like, well, it wasn't connected. I didn't connect it to anything, and we did other things for visual variation. But really, full screen effects can be expensive, whether 2D or 3D, for different
This is
reasons,
true.
which I'll talk about. And he said, well, you did time of day in a lot of your games. There was time of day in Fallout. There was time of day in Arcanum. And the Arcanum one mattered. I mean, there were traits you could get for day mage and night mage, similarly like indoor and outdoor mage. And he said, one thing I noticed was not only did the shadows move, and they did, although I'm wondering if that made it for Arcanum. But he said one thing he did notice was that coloration was different for dawn and dusk. And I remember adding that. And yeah, I did that even though
Nice.
colorblind. Because the artist said, yeah, dusk
That's right.
and dawn look different. Dawn's a little blue tinted and dusk is a little red tinted. And I added that in. Even though at the time, all it looked like was dawn did look blue tinted, but dusk just looked like we were dimming the pixels. I've talked on this channel about fun versus realism, and I'll link that video below. I'm not going to repeat that. I've even talked about what is fun by itself. I've just talked about fun in and of itself, which can be very subjective. I link that below. What I want to talk about is adding realistic features and why you should or shouldn't. And I do have videos like encumbrance. In fact, I got a 2-part on encumbrance because that is a feature that you may think I added
We
for
reacted
the
to both of
realism,
those.
but it really was included more for the challenge. It wasn't included. What I want to make clear is it wasn't included because it was realistic. That wasn't the only reason.
No, encumbrance has very real effects on the gameplay, and I think even to some extent weather can too. I mean, imagine a stalker game without the weather, right? Even with a day-night cycle, morning to night, and you ask yourself, okay, does the removal of weather make the game more or less enjoyable? And I want to use the word enjoyable or entertaining as opposed to fun, right? Because there could be really nasty weather effects, and that might not make the game more fun, but it might make it more entertaining. And ultimately, that's to me what a game should be. If you think of the first 20 minutes of The Last of Us, you don't think, oh, this is fun. I mean, it's very on the rails, but it's visually impressive. It's very emotional, and you're thinking, I'm entertained. I'm not necessarily having fun while I'm watching a young girl get shot, right? Hopefully. So I think that weather, if you do it, if you include it for the sake of ambience, and your game is built off of the atmosphere that the nature can provide to you. I mean, think of even Death Stranding that we played recently, or like I said, Stalker. These are games that the weather and the time of day is heavily driving the ambience, and in some cases even the gameplay. Like in Death Stranding, the blizzard, the rain, makes things more slippery, or it might make you cold, or it reduces the sound of footsteps. These have actual gameplay implications. So it's should we have weather? And your answer should be, well, yes, because it's it's a real world. So in the real world has weather. It should be, what are we doing it for, right? Is it just to have the ambience and the atmosphere? In which case, I think that's still a valid reason. But also, can we tie anything to the effects of it? Can we make a blizzard? Can we make a snowstorm, a sand tornado? Can we do anything that's out of the box that changes the gameplay too? So when the player is thinking, okay, here's my systems driven game, or here's my game with systems in it, weather can be one of those systems. And you think, well, I'm not going to go outside right now because it's daytime and it's sunny. It's clear. I'm trying to stealth. I'm going to be seen. I'm going to wait till it's rainy and nighttime, and therefore I'm going to have a advantage to the systems of the game.
And that's what I want to talk about here. It's like, let's talk about realistic features, how they get implemented, and why that can be expensive, and why you may not want them in your game. And I'll talk about different ones, and they all kind of, after a while, you'll see that when I get to the pros and cons, it's like just the same as the one before. So let's go through these. Let's start with weather, because that's what my friend asked me about.
Yes.
This is where you have rain or snow or fog or something in your game.
Fog is a good one.
Looks cool. I will totally agree. And it also provides variation. People go back to the same location and it's raining. It can look a little different.
That's true too.
They go back to an area and it snowed. It can look a lot different. But
well, again, and like with fog, you might have disadvantages to the gameplay based on something having fog. I mean, imagine driving in a racing game with fog. It's not just a visual difference now, it is an actual hindrance, and you don't have as much clarity of what's coming up and to prepare for it. So there are in most cases, weather can be used to provide your players with advantages or disadvantages in some way, and that should be the focus.
Let me just tell you that this can be very expensive to do. Making puddles appear, making footprints, you step through a puddle and then you leave wet footprints, or there's snow and you leave footprints in the snow. No matter how this is done, whether in 2D it's done with decals and swapping out tiles and even walls for the snow version, or whether it's done in 3D with, we can do materials to make things look wet, and I can do a pixel shader and stuff like that. It doesn't matter. It's extra work.
Yep.
And extra either memory and or CPU time.
Well, it's not even just that, it's also expensive because it has to be created, right? And I got in a little bit of trouble from a chatter. I know I'm not petty at all or anything, but I was arguing that Assassin's Creed Shadows would have been better, their time and money would have been better spent focusing on making the gameplay better as opposed to adding all these realistic things that I don't think are going to help the gameplay at its core. So AAA is suffering under that weight of trying to make everything as realistic and amazing as possible, and then you have Japanese developers like From Software that there's tons of weapon and armor clipping in Elden Ring. There's barely any visual effects to speak about, and in a lot of cases they kind of look like shit, especially with the water, and the texture resolutions aren't very high, and some of the models are a bit simple, and you know what? Nobody cares because the game is fun. And that's the right way to do it. Don't put it in there if it's not important to the gameplay. Yeah, definitely is probably the most expensive part, unless it's core mechanic, it's hard to justify. Yeah. Like, if you're building a game that's meant to look and feel realistic, you can argue that realism in the technology and in the art is important to it. This is fair. But if it isn't important to your game, then it is fluff. And fluff should not take priority over the core functionality. In Uma Musume, the weather, even in Uma Musume, is... It does play an effect on the gameplay element, so...
And sometimes both. So you are paying for this. Whether you like it or not, you are paying for these effects. And my point here is, unless they're somehow integrated into the system mechanics somehow, then it just becomes window dressing.
Exactly.
If you can't get some bonus, like I fight better in the snow, or there are cold effects that happen. When I go into an area and it's cold and snowy, I may get a debuff put on me. Or if I throw a fire-based spell in heavy rain, it gets debuffed a little bit.
Jason!
Or maybe it doesn't have its side effects. Maybe a fireball would still burn someone, but they wouldn't get a fire damage over time, a fire dot effect put on them. If it doesn't have things like that, I do question, why are you adding it? It doesn't change the game in a material way. It's just window dressing.
My only counter argument is that to some games, the atmosphere is an important factor. And even if in a game like, let's say, Vanishing of Ethan Carter. You guys know Vanishing of Ethan Carter? This game, looked really great back in the day. It was built by a very small indie team, and it's a beautiful game. It's a really beautiful walking simulator with an interesting story. I think that if you were to add rain into this game, you could argue it doesn't do anything. But because the game is built around the atmosphere of these dilapidated, decrepit locations and the nature, that having the rain is playing into your senses, right? It is both a visual and audible bit of sensory information that is, selling the feel of the game. Game looks familiar. What game is this? Vanishing of Ethan Carter. Same people that are now working on Witchfire, which also is a pretty awesome and good-looking game too. So yeah, I think that my counterpoint to Tim here, although he isn't making the arguments explicitly, is just that I think that sometimes weather and realistic effects can augment the feeling of the game. Yes, they aren't core to the core gameplay loop, which is why you usually wouldn't like put them in a prototype, but they can help sell and make the game look and feel better, and that does correlate to sales in some cases.
And you have to ask yourself,
Yeah,
look at the expense of it, and is that a worthwhile window dressing?
This is true though. The expense of it, if you have to create it for your own engine, or even if you download something like okay, Fab isn't loading, but even if you, okay, here it is. If you download Ultra Dynamic Sky for like 30, $40, it isn't expensive, but it is going to cost more GPU to run something like this as opposed to not having it, as opposed to having something simpler.
And especially look at it this way: the time you're spending to make the same area look rainy.
That's true too, Zach. If you want to keep artists on staff, they're going to dress those windows. Yeah, I mean sometimes you do just need to give them something to do because you don't want to hire. I cannot get Tim on a perfect face anyway. Oh, Michela, also welcome. How you doing? But yeah, if you want to have those people on staff and you don't want to fire them or move them to another project because that can also come with its own complexities, then give them something to do. And in those cases, yeah, it's fair to give them some extra stuff. Can I ask a question? Yes, you can ask a question.
Time you're spending to make the same area look rainy is time your artist could have spent making a whole different area. So you may have
this is true.
A wealthy version of the town, and you may make a little shanty version, another neighborhood of the town. Well, guess what? You may lose one of those neighborhoods because you wanted to make the nice version look different when it's wet.
Well, on top of that too, if you hired 20 artists for 6 months of work and they got all their work done in 4 months, you've miscalculated, right? This is a production issue. And yeah, you could put them on making the game look or feel better, but ultimately what you should have done is not hire as many artists and spend that money elsewhere, or just budget less of your game overall and therefore save money, and therefore, you'd have a better likelihood of succeeding financially because your return on investment would be higher. Have you started building cities for games in Unreal Engine? I have never built personally a city, but I've worked on a game where we had cities in Unreal Engine. I work on more like non-realistic games in most cases in Unreal, so building cities has never been my kind of thing. But if you have a follow-up question to that, I can try to answer.
You will be paying for that difference. And I'm going to be bringing this up repeatedly. It is a big deal. You should be thinking about this. And let's go to the other thing that he and I talked about, which was time of day. And that's done with lighting and shadow, coloration. It is. I'm not going to talk much about that. But I will tell you, time of day looks great. But it's expensive.
It is.
And it's expensive.
It's really expensive. I mean, having a baked-in time of day means you can bake in the shadows for a lot of things, and having the realistic time of day means that everything needs to be dynamically updated, including the shadows. And shadows are one of the most expensive things in any like open world scene by far. It's shadows, and choosing what you want to actually have shadows and not have shadows is a very crucial part to optimizing any open world scene. Ooh. Want to know how it's done? Secret building cities and rails to build them in Houdini. Yes, I was actually just gonna say, if you want to build buildings and cities Houdini is the way to go. And honestly, if you do learn Houdini, it is very, 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 very easy to get a job in the industry. It's not cheap and it's not easy to learn, but if you learn it, a lot of companies are looking for a Houdini master.
Expensive for a whole bunch of different reasons. You have to do um, shadows can be expensive to do, and sometimes a scene looks really good when it's been pre-rendered with wonderful baked-in
Yep.
shadows. And then you switch to real-time lighting and it's just not as good because real-time lighting you usually have to cut corners to make it something that you can do without destroying your frame rate.
Yeah, it's just because shadows are so expensive. If you can bake in those shadows, then the game looks good. I mean, that's even why, old Lucas Arts games, which didn't have dynamic day-night cycles, but they also had pre-rendered backgrounds. Even Resident Evil, I think, did this in one of its early versions. Like the Grim Fandango remaster, right? This game came out in, when did this game originally come out? Like the 90s? Something like that? They used pre-rendered backgrounds. And the only thing that are rendered on the screen in this case for like this scene would be characters and this little boxing thing. That's the only thing being rendered in 3D. The rest of it, all the background, is just the pre-rendered and a little bit of the character shadow too. That's it. So, I mean, this was a way to cut corners back in the day that actually looked really good, and I think even you don't need to do this nowadays, of course, but it was a really cool trick that I think worked really well.
And but real-time lighting is great if like you want to cast a fireball and
Final Fantasy VII did this too. Let me look that up. Did the original one have the pre-rendered backgrounds? I never played the original. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, look at that. That's crazy. And I think it also helps the game stand the test of time just a little bit better.
when it shoots off, you can see all the shadows change. That's great. I get it. It looks gorgeous. And I'm the first one to say beauty sells. People will look
Yep.
at your game if it's gorgeous.
Publishers too.
But I always ask, does it matter? Does the game change materially because of it? And again, I think about in Arcanum, we had time of day because we had day mages and night mages. We had indoor out mages and outdoor mages. It mattered. Time of day could matter. Also, when you shot someone with a ranged weapon, the lighting was taken into account, so it was harder to shoot someone far away when it was dark. When you stealthed in Arcanum, it took in the ambient lighting conditions, so it was easier to sneak around at night than during the day.
Yep.
I don't know if how many people figured that out, but it was way easier to do that.
Well, same thing in Golden Chronicles, right? And I don't think we took advantage of it to the extent that the design wanted to, because we wanted to have time of day and weather influence also, even if certain ingredients were available, like a flower that only opened up while it was raining. So just beyond being able to have the passage of time of day for like farming purposes, which was kind of its main purpose in our prototype, we wanted to go even deeper and utilize everything that nature had to offer, or time of day for moon cycles. And moon cycles was built into the core story of Golden Chronicles, that the corruption spread every full moon. So, we intended to use that very deeply, but that was exactly why we wanted to have a really beautiful day-night cycle, because the visuals helped to sell, and then the mechanics of what the visuals provided was also important.
So it mattered. So Arcanum got time of day because it was visually cool, but it also mattered in system mechanics. Let's go on to another one. Eating and drinking. That's a great use of consumables. You put a bunch of consumables in the game like healing potions. You can also put food and drink. And
I'm not a fan of eating and drinking in games. I think that in most cases, it's handled really poorly. Like trying to shove survival mechanics into a game that wasn't built to be a survival game. I fucking hate that. I know people really like those like survival type mods for like Skyrim and such. Like Frost, I think, is a big one that adds food, water, and temperature and stuff. I'm not about that. Like I'm okay playing a survival game where I have to scavenge for food and water, that's fine. But when you shove survival mechanics in a game that feels like it wasn't built to have survival mechanics, it just rubs me the wrong way. I have no interest in it.
They can have effects when you eat them. You
It's
can
lazy.
have backgrounds that have dietary restrictions. You want to play a vegan character? There goes all the animal
That's a
products.
good use.
You can associate it with difficulty levels like we did with Outer Worlds, where you didn't need to eat or drink unless you played Supernova. So, again, that's an example of
Mm-hmm.
it going into the mechanics of the game. But you have to ask yourself, if you just add eating and drinking for no other reason than to have it into
Exactly.
in your game,
Exactly.
is it fun to manage that for the player? Forget all the implementation stuff you now have to do, because all these things have to be created and put in, and
Test it too. Yeah.
programming, and a good
Localization.
user interface has to be made for
Mm-hmm.
this that conveys to the player you're getting hungry, you're getting thirsty. Is it fun for the player to deal with all that? And how much time did you spend balancing it and making that UX look good? And especially when you think of food, you have to think in terms of quantity, quality, and nutrition. And suddenly you have all these different things. You've got to look at your consumables in a completely different way. It wasn't just, hey, we have bread in the game and you can bake it as part of crafting and then it gives you 5 hit points back if you eat it. No, no, no. You have to think for eating and drinking, how much does it satiate you? Is it good for you? Because if you eat all just one thing, is the game going to take that into account or not? It can get complicated fast until after a while you realize, I'm just making an eating sim.
Yep.
And is that what you really want to do?
Well, I mean, you could even take a look at games where I would argue that you could have put eating and drinking into the game, like Red Dead Redemption 2, and yet the only thing that it did was it made Arthur more fat if he ate more often, or more skinny if he didn't eat as often. So you could argue that this is an unneeded realistic design, but I mean, it's a Rockstar. I mean, they're the kings of this. But either way, they knew that this would not be a good fit for the type of game that they're trying to tell. Same with their hunting system. They could have made a hunting system that was way more complex and realistic than it was. But what they decided to do was say, no, let's make it feel realistic to engage with, but gamify it so that it's easy to learn, and a little bit more challenging to master. Right, using the right ammo, hunting these creatures that might attack you back and what. So there's a good balance to achieve with that. And if you just go into the game design and say, well, I want to make a survival game and every little aspect of it is going to be so minutely tracked and detailed, you're going to be narrowing your audience more and more and more with each thing. And there is an audience for people who like RimWorld, who like Kenshi, who like um, Dwarf Fortress, but it is going to be a lot smaller than you might achieve if you just made things a little bit more accessible. But two ends of the extreme. It's a good balance, right? Eating and drinking falls apart mostly because the people implementing it have never had to carry their own food for more than a day trip. Every endeavor wants to implement hunger and thirst should spend a week living off mainstay bars first. Experience the lemony hell. It's just okay. So here's one of the things that I teach junior designers when I'm teaching them. Always ask why. Always, 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 always. When you say, "Hey, I have this really cool idea for a mechanic," or you hear somebody saying, "I have this really cool idea for a feature for the game," why? Why are we adding it? And you should put that into your design docs. We're adding this because it does this for the player, because it assists with this aspect of the mechanics. It plays, the weather plays with the growing of the plants in the game, and it assists with farming, so things don't grow at night unless they have the artificial lighting or whatever. Or it's in a cave, so it's a mushroom and it doesn't need sunlight to thrive. Retromancer, thank you for the follow as well. So always be able to answer why. And if you can't answer why we're including something in the game, then you have to ask yourself, should we really add it to the game? And it
Very
is so surprising, by the way, the number of designers that I've worked with, where if you ask them, why do we have this feature, they can't give an answer. It's staggering how often that.
similar to this would be sleep. I've made games where you have to sleep. I've had exhaustion effects. This can be interesting to introduce to the game because now the player has to find a safe place to sleep. And sleeping can be anything.
But you just said the thing that makes it interesting is a safe place to sleep, right? You've already added more mechanics on top of simply every 4 hours you need to sleep or else you face a debuff. This alone is so shallow that I would think most players would be like, why is this here? Can I just turn this off? Can I find a mod to disable the sleep requirement? But now finding a safe space, a safe place to sleep is an additional mechanic, right? Are there enemies nearby? Is this an owned bed? Do I need to rent the inn? Do I gain any advantage to renting a proper bed at an inn over just sleeping in a bedroll?
From you're fine if you don't sleep, but if you want to get like certain spells back or restore your
Yep.
health completely or your mana completely, you have to sleep. You have to go find a safe place to do it because you don't want a random encounter to occur.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you have to pay to sleep. Maybe it's a money sink. When you're traveling, maybe it takes into account sleep periods. So when you move across the world map, that's taken into account of how long it takes to get somewhere. But you have to ask yourself, is it fun for the player to manage not just the quantity of sleep their character has to do, but the quality? And you all know what I'm talking about. You've played games where if you pay for a nice inn, you get a buff for sleeping. But if you just roll your bedroll out on the dungeon floor, not only might you might get interrupted, but you don't get as good sleep. These are all mechanics that you can introduce to make sleep worthwhile.
Yep.
But again, if you do that for everything, are you making a fun RPG or are you making a immersive sim?
Exactly that, and it's okay to make either. I mean, you would play a game like Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is an immersive sim, or Red Dead Redemption, which is an immersive sim, and these sorts of pacing, or these sorts of slower paced games, do not appeal to some people. I mean, I've talked to people here in the chat who, if I said Red Dead Redemption 2 is really great, they would say it's really slow and boring, and that's their opinion, right? And that's fine. So they're just probably not a fan of immersive sims as a whole, because immersive sims tend to generally be slower and have those things that some people would consider tedious or boring or time wasting. But to the people that enjoy it, that helps with the feeling of immersion in the game, and making them feel as if they exist in a world that follows its own rules. And you can make immersive sims that are not a realistic setting, right? Even Colden Chronicles, to an extent, is advertised as an immersive sim. That's how I pitched it, an immersive sim RPG, because I wanted to slow the pacing down, allow the player to get deeper into some of the systems, and it wasn't just a run around and do things all the time. But it was in between complete action game and something like Kingdom Come or Red Dead Redemption 2, right? It's an interesting topic, but it's specifically, what are you trying to make? Are you trying to make a game that has complex systems for the sake of it, or are you trying to make an immersive sim, and is this part of the pacing? This is where I also teach junior designers to think about gameplay percentages. What percentage of the gameplay is the player spending doing this feature, or engaging in this part of the game, or this part, or even spending in menus? What's important to your game, and what is the player spending their time doing? This will help you to understand, can we add more complexity to this? But you should always ask yourself, should we, and why are we adding more to this? An example would be Colden Chronicles. I think the alchemy was supposed to be like 15% of the gameplay, even though it's an alchemy based game. But if we made it like 80% of the gameplay, well, now the game is literally about alchemy, and we have no time left for the open world. So let's just not have an open world in that case. But we wanted a lot of the gameplay to be out in the open world or with the NPCs, and the alchemy was your profession and your tool set for engaging with these. But because we wanted the player to be out and about more, spend less time doing this, make it really easy to learn, hard to master, but also fast to complete, so that they have the right amount of time being spent in. Gameplay percentages are important.
A immersive sim, I always tell people, go back and look at your goals. If your goal was not to make a realistic simulation of a role-playing world, then you may want to question why you're doing all this. Disease is another one where disease is often put into a game so that spells and wounds and even food can introduce disease to the player that becomes both a visual and a system mechanic, a status effect. So it has.
I think disease is just a fancy way to basically say modifier, right? Because what is a disease in most RPG games apart from being just a modifier? Oh, hunger is generated 20% faster. Bleeds last 50%, when you bleed, it lasts 50% longer before closing on its own, or your damage is debuffed by minus 20%. To me, it works, but again, it's very shallow. It's an easy implementation to do, but it's shallow. And if your game isn't really benefiting from it, there's a lot of games that have disease that you could remove that and find other more creative ways to provide the same modifiers, like through a specific choice that was made, or a deity that it can be broken if you don't act in a certain way or whatever. All of these have a little bit more steps and a little bit more depth to them than just you got disease and that's it. Now a little icon is shown on your HUD and your stats are debuffed. Okay, great, I guess. I mean, it's not doing anything apart from that, so was it really worth implementing? I don't know.
Effects on the player. And like I just mentioned, you can work it into the game system mechanics. Mummy rotting disease is a great one from D&D. If you don't support disease mechanics, mummies are not nearly as frightening because they're supposed to hit you and cause a mummy disease that lasted a while.
Well, I mean, there's also, I think, good examples of like vampirism in Elder Scrolls. I think it's a really cool example. It's something that you kind of have to be aware of and know that I'm going to turn into a vampire if I don't get this cured. And if I turn into a vampire and I didn't want to, it's a bit of a lengthy challenge to get that properly taken care of. So I think that that's interesting, and all of the other diseases. I mean, how many people here in chat remember any other disease in Elder Scrolls apart from maybe like vampirism and like one other one that you might know the name of? I would bet that most people in chat don't remember the names of Elder Scrolls diseases apart from vampirism, just because it actually has gameplay elements that make it memorable, make it deep, make it interesting. And even in some cases, becoming a vampire is what you want. You specifically go out into the world and seek vampirism because you like the effects or you like the role playing aspect of it. So I think there are really cool ways to do diseases that in most RPGs and in most immersive sims never get explored, right? Or even people refusing to talk to you would be really cool. Red Dead Redemption worked disease into its plotline, so you couldn't get diseases, but Arthur did get tuberculosis, and so I don't think that really counts here. Still interesting.
And it gave a good reason, by the way, another good reason to have a good constitution. High constitution characters don't get disease very often, and when they do, the disease runs its course very quickly. You can also make perks and feats or whatever your game has to make disease even more interesting. But is it fun? And how much of your user interface are you going to devote to telling player this is your current disease status, this is the stage the disease is at? How easy is it to find the material, the consumable in your in your inventory to do something about that disease, to manage it? Are there entire spells that just exist to cure disease, so they do nothing else in the game but get rid of a status effect that you get from some other part of the game?
Well, you've now had to code it, you've had to test it, you've had to localize it, you've had to make sound effects for it. It's not like we just added a disease and it's a very cheap thing to do. No, I mean, it takes money, and you have to trim the things that you have to trim the fat on a game, right? I mean, if you have the time and the effort to massage the game enough to give it some marbling, if we want to use our fat analogy, that's great. But it's just the right amount of fat. If it's too fatty, you have no meat, and if it's too meaty, you have no fat. And some people like a lot of meat, some people like a lot of fat, but most people, if you serve them the middle ground, that beautifully marbled steak, that's what most people are going to say that they prefer. Collywobbles and damp. Are those real in Elder Scrolls? That's pretty funny.
Is this what you want? If this is not part of your design goals, why are you adding it?
Mm-hmm. I mean, and again, it depends on case. You could say that RimWorld, with how deep it is, RimWorld's Dwarf Fortress inspired, so it kind of, I'll just combine these. Dwarf Fortress and RimWorld are kind of the same thing in this case, where the little stories of, oh, your character tripped on a stick and lost their eye, so now they have minus 20 accuracy, and because of that, they accidentally shot, you know, Tim the Toolman, and now his wife, the wife of Tim the Toolman, hates your character for shooting him. Like, that's cool. That's interesting because it develops that story, and that's exactly why Tinan or Tynan, I don't know how to pronounce his name, the creator of RimWorld, says that RimWorld is a story generator. That's how he defines it. It's a little bit stuck up of a definition, but I understand it. I understand the reason behind it. It's very much a design explanation of how the game works. You do need one of the unofficial patches to catch a damp worm, though.
Those are all the big ones I could think of. I could go on and on about all the different
Yeah.
realistic details that you may or may not want in your game, but they all boil down to the same thing, which is if you're considering adding a realistic feature, ask yourself, is it worked into the game mechanics somehow? Is it reflective of the goals, the design goals that you wrote down for the whole game and the section of the game where this realistic feature would work in?
I'm
Whether
going to
it's
be honest. I think it's not just about realistic designs. This should be what you're asking yourself and what you're analyzing and what you're introspecting about or anything related to game design. This is the core of game design. It's why I tell people game design is not about having ideas. It's about filtering ideas and blueprinting those ideas for the team. You are going to be bombarded with ideas for a game the moment that you work as a designer for a team by people outside of it, family members, friends, people on the team, from managers, from publishers, from marketing. All of them are going to have ideas of how to make your game better. Some of them will, a lot of them won't. And it's your job to figure out, okay, we like this one, but it would take 2 months to develop. Can we find a way to develop it in a way, or mirror the to mimic the effect of it in a cheaper way? No, let's save it for the sequel, or let's plan it for like a DLC or something because it's so big. That's what your job is. It's a lot more boring than just having ideas. But for people who like problem solving, I think game design is a great pathway for a career. You won't get paid a lot for it, but it's fun.
it's time of day or disease, does that part of the game need something that realistic feature is supporting?
Mm-hmm.
And then beyond challenge, beyond all of that, is it fun for the player? Is it interesting for the player to interact with?
And
If it's
again, I will just say I prefer the word interesting or entertaining as opposed to fun. Just because fun is so subjective. I mean, it's all subjective, but what I mean is fun is so subjective to the moment, right? A character getting shot in a game that you love is not fun, but it is entertaining. And so therefore you still, you like the game because of that. A game can make you cry and you're not saying, I'm having so much fun playing this. You're more like emotionally invested in it, and you end the game thinking, I had a really enjoyable time. That game was so amazing, so emotional, so deep.
not, if it's just there to make the game challenging, it'll probably also make the game frustrating. So you want to ask yourself that.
Well,
And then third,
but sometimes, Tim, frustration is managed frustration in a game can be a part of the mechanic and part of the gameplay loop. It depends on the game. Tim, okay, I'm not gonna say you're old, but Tim, you're old enough to know of a game called Majesty, the Fantasy Kingdom sim. I would assume because you're a big fan of fantasy and RPGs. Um, Majesty had managed frustration in the fact that you don't directly control the units that you hire, right? They are their own individuals, they are their own souls, and the best you can do is influence them to do the things you want. But if your warrior is scared and wants to spend his time gambling and drinking in the tavern, he is going to do that unless you really, really incentivize him to go outside. So that kind of managed frustration can be part of the challenge of the game, but you shouldn't be going into a design necessarily saying, my goal is to frustrate you because that's necessarily fun. There has to be something deeper to it, right? Even a game like Only Up or like those rage platformers that I am actually making one of, it is meant to be challenging, it's meant to be frustrating, but it's because it's good content, right? The people that play Only Up are in a lot of cases content creators because it's really fun to watch your favorite content creator get mad and fall, and That's entertaining. It's entertaining. So you can design a game with the intention that it is a fun game to watch somebody else play, but not necessarily play yourself. And for a lot of content creators, that is the way that they make money. They're not necessarily making money off of having fun on stream, but rather creating the content, and therefore a rage platformer, a precision platformer is their content. Tim, you're a dinosaur. You're older than Dirt. You were the lead designer on the Dirt. Oh, fuck, dude. Calling him the lead designer on the Dirt project, that might be a bit far. I'm gonna get Tim in my DMs like, you can't make reactions to me anymore. I will try to reach out to him this year, though, and have Tim on if he's open to it, because I would just love to talk to him about game design. That would be fun. I hope he'd be open to that.
Third, you really want to ask yourself about the implementation. How much extra art is needed?
Exactly.
How much extra code is needed? How much extra time is needed at the intersection between art and code?
And this is this is exactly what a good designer and a good producer, because there's a lot of overlap in their work, is thinking about. When I'm thinking about, okay, we need a system in our shooter game for the player to attach attachments to a gun, and I'm thinking, okay, what does this look like? Okay, well, the player has loot tables are relatively cheap. All these parts have strings, so we'll need to get that localized, and that's going to have to be talked about with the producer. We have the visual aspect, so that it is a 2D game, so thankfully we don't need models for it, but we do need sprites. And because of that, we need to make sure that the designs of the guns can fit the attachments that are going to be there. We also have to make sure that the attachments themselves are of a specific size, and I'll need to dictate that. We need to design how many attachments for each gun, how many guns do we have, and then I need to talk to the lead artist about how long it takes to make a batch of these attachments. We only have 2 weeks until the next milestone where we promise this feature, so we have to think about all this, how much it's going to cost, how many people are involved, and then that's when we talk about, okay, how do we implement this? How do we actually start this this ball rolling? And ultimately, what separates like a junior designer or a junior producer from a senior one is that you have that experience of knowing how much it's going to take. You know your team better, and junior designers are really great at like just kind of those menial tasks, learning. They're still absorbing a lot of info. So yeah, it's a tough topic. Still being new to game design and game dev in general, it all feels easy and like common sense until you were in the thick. Yeah, it does. It really does. Even with something like gun attachments, you could think, well, they should just add gun attachments to the game. And a modder might think, okay, well, I'm going to add gun attachments to the game, so it's just a slot on the gun. It's like, well, now how do you perform the attachment? When do you perform the attachment? Are attachments part of your main inventory? Are they part of like an infinite inventory? What do they modify? How much do they modify it? Does that break the game in any way? How are the animations? If it's a 3D game, how do the animations change for a gun without a scope versus one with a scope? Now we need to design the scope in a 3D way. We need to make sure that it's rendering, the lens effect properly. It all just it can all exacerbate really far, and so you then kind of think, okay, so we probably need to think if our guns should have attachments in pre-production, which it's true, right? It's enough of a big feature that you can't just plop it on later. It impacts the design of your entire game, the pacing of the game, the balance of it, whether or not people can trade for these to sell them to NPCs. Well, now we have a new way to make money. It impacts loot tables, and if attachments are taking a part of a loot table, now other things are less common, right? Depending on how you design the loot tables, and that can again impact the challenge of the game. Now, because attachments are showing up 20% of the time, that means we have fewer instances of ammo and medkits showing up. We need to augment that, or we need to make them a little bit better at what they do. So it's just one little thing can trickle down into the rest of the game. I think this was actually one of Tim's arguments about encumbrance, is that encumbrance, okay, we don't like it, let's remove encumbrance. Well, now we have infinite storage capacity, and we have sorting algorithms that will get bloated because the player can pick up as much as they want. Now they can pick up all the armor that they see when they go fight a bunch of bandits, and they can make a shit ton of money, and the game's economy is broken. Yeah, it's if you're new to game design or you're just like a gamer that hasn't thought about it, a lot can seem simple, but beneath the surface there is a lot of time and mental effort that goes into every single system. So even something as simple as should we have a dynamic day-night cycle? Well, now we can't bake in our shadows in the open world, and that's a big performance cost.
You know, I'm talking pixel shaders and materials that have to work a very certain way for that realistic feature to work. I'm not even factoring in the design time you spent doing it, the audio time. People want, hey, you know, I want it to sound, I want good rain sound. I want my footsteps to sound different on the road when there's snow on the road. All the decals you have to make for the footsteps.
Well, and maybe imagine if you have footsteps and you have rain, you're gonna have to double all the sounds needed because now now you're not just walking on wood, you're walking on wet wood, right? And we need to make it realistic, so of course, double the sounds. And now some of those are going to be harder for a sound designer to source than others, and that's time and money.
They have to decay because you can't have too many decals on the screen.
Or things drying over time. I mean, how do you handle something being wet? Do you show it being wet? Do you just it's all just a mess.
These are all things that are part of your implementation costs. Don't even get me started that you now have to make a playtest plan for all of these things for QA to look into.
Yep.
You have just increased your game's cost and complexity a lot, and ask yourself, is it worth it?
Well, and this is also one of the problems with like branching narrative games, right? Where, okay, you allow the player to make a decision. That's 2 branches. You allow the player on each of those branches to make a decision. That's 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. And it's not that... It's not even just that the content creation for something like that is extremely difficult, but also the testing of that. And if you don't have good testing tools, your QA is going to be in absolute hell. And they're going to miss a lot of bugs that players are going to encounter, and then therefore your game is going to be reviewed poorly because the game is, you know, buggy. It's forgetting choices, and in a choice-based game, that is your bread and butter. To be fair, a lot of those sound variants can be done via single convolution. This is true. But the general aspect of, well, now we need to test whether this level is playable at nighttime, right? Can the player still, do we have the right visual cues for the player to see that this dungeon is here in the nighttime, or is it only visible during the daytime, which we had previously? Well, now we need to add some lights at nighttime, or some lights at nighttime, and so there's just more considerations when you add in more variables. And day-night cycle, weather, these are variables being added to the 3D scene that level artists, level designers will have to be aware of.
So, I hope that helps you if you're thinking about adding something realistic to your game, just for the sake of it being realistic.
Tim, great video. Always ask why. Always think about what is the purpose of this feature, and should we add it? Does it align with the core vision and the goals of the game and the pillars of the game? 100% agree. Another great video from Tim. Now I'm thinking about it, I have a lot of respect for the devs of Fortnite. Fortnite would often add features players ask for. That game must be hella dynamic for being able to add new stuff. Yeah, so I mean, really, games that can add content so fast like that have extremely great organization and architecture. And that's not an easy thing to achieve. It's really, really difficult. So, guys, thank you for watching that one. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace, YouTube.